citizens of the earth.
And ASEAN is our home.
It is rich with natural heritage.
The mountains,
the farmlands,
the cities,
the rivers,
the wetland.
Nature provides for us all.
Air,
nourishment,
shelter and protection,
jobs and livelihood,
and the medicine to prevent diseases.
But humankind has taken more than nature can provide.
What was convenient for us has become harmful for all life on Earth.
We have caused a crisis that is slowly destroying nature,
affecting us all.
It is time to set things right.
We can still mend our broken relationship with nature.
And with each other.
Plant native trees,
regrow our forests,
maintain the natural fertility of our soils,
stop destructive fishing practices,
keep our waters free from litter,
harness the power of clean energy,
become responsible tourists,
respect local culture,
design greener cities,
foster sustainable communities.
Saving biodiversity means saving lives.
To secure our future, we must nurture nature.
For our only home.
Why wait for the next crisis to happen?
It's time to act now.
For ASEAN.
For biodiversity.
For nature.
Ako ay bahagi ng solusyon.
เราคือส่วนหนึ่งของการแก้ปัญหา
Tôi là một phần của giải pháp.
I am the part of the solution.
I am 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 part of the solution.
We are
part of the solution.
Are you?
Peatland ecosystems are made up of decayed waterlogged biomass. They are home to unique and endangered flora and fauna and are highly efficient natural carbon sinks. In the ASEAN region, peatlands cover approximately 56% of global tropical peatlands. It is estimated that ASEAN peatlands store approximately 68 billion tons of carbon, or 14% of carbon stored in peatlands globally. In the past few decades, human interventions such as logging, slash and burn, deforestation, drainage for agriculture, and consequently increasing wildfires have turned ASEAN's carbon-rich peatlands into gigantic carbon emitters. Annual emissions are now estimated at about 2 billion tons, approximately 4% of global fossil fuel emissions. Since the late 1990s, uncontrolled large-scale land and forest fires occurring mainly on peatlands plagued Southeast Asia. The fires caused severe transboundary smoke haze pollution, affecting millions of people's health, the disruption of transport, economic losses, and potential adverse impacts between neighboring countries. Globally, this situation contributed to huge releases of carbon and widespread loss of the unique and valuable peatland biodiversity and ecosystems. To support ASEAN's endeavors in combating transboundary haze pollution and peatland fires, sustainable use of peatland and haze mitigation in ASEAN, SUPA program, is launched with €20 million contributions from the European Union and €4 million from the German government. The objective of the SUPA program is to promote the sustainable management of peatlands in the ASEAN region through collective actions and enhanced cooperation, to support and sustain local livelihoods, reduce the risk of fire and associated haze, and contribute to global environmental management. The program is structured into two components. The goal of Component 1 is to strengthen ASEAN and ASEAN member states to implement ASEAN peatland management strategy and national action plans on peatlands. GIZ will support ASEAN and the ASEAN member states through capacity building, strengthening regional cooperation through provision of technical and material support to regional institutions on sustainable peatland management and implementation of best practices, peatland governance on the ground. Through these collective efforts, we are working towards sustainable peatland management and climate change mitigation in ASEAN.
Hello, good afternoon everyone, and welcome to the 4th ASEAN-EU Cooperation and Scholarship Day 2021. I hope everyone is well and has had the chance to look around the expo today. My name is Nabila Ernada and I'll be your moderator for this session. In this session, we are going to discuss youth and biodiversity. As we all know, ASEAN has one of the richest biodiversities in the world. Protecting it is essential to ensure a healthy environment, sustainable economic development, and also ensuring food security for the region. Of course, it can't be me alone. I have an excellent round of panelists who will present and talk about youth and biodiversity. First, we are joined by Dr. Eli Sari from the EU SUPA, or Sustainable Use of Peatland and Haze Mitigation in ASEAN Project. Next, we have Mr. Armil Saran from ASEAN Youth Biodiversity Program as Program Specialist for AHP Program and BCAMP Project. Hello.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon. Next, we have Gab Meja, co-founder of Youth Engaged in Wetlands, who has honored the Forbes Under 30 Asia list through his work as National Geographic Explorer and Nikon Asia Ambassador. He covers stories in nature, wildlife, and culture. And last but not least, we have Ms. Aubrey Padilla, wildlife conservationist and 2019 Youth Biodiversity Leader. Aubrey is also a National Geographic Explorer. So hello, panelists. Hi, everyone.
Hi. Hello.
Hi, everyone. Hi. I hope we're all well today. So let's get started. I think it is important for all of us to have a common understanding of what biodiversity might mean. I myself still don't really understand the concept. So perhaps, Mr. Amil, you can start by providing us the working definition of what biodiversity is.
Oh, well, thank you. What is biodiversity? Actually, I can give a science textbook definition. But of course, I would assume each one of us has already encountered that definition while we were in our grade school, high school, or even in college. But I think to have a more grounded definition of biodiversity, it is the more practical way of defining biodiversity is that biodiversity is life. So from the variety of the food that we eat, the different types of rice we have, the vegetables and the fishes, these are all biodiversity. The water we drink, the air that we breathe, even the clothes that we wear. So I cannot think of anything that is not rooted on biodiversity. We may not be totally aware, but our everyday life is always an encounter with biodiversity. Because we are part of biodiversity, we are biodiversity, we are ASEAN biodiversity. And if we look at it at the macro level, in terms of economic development, economic development of every country is very much dependent on the natural capital. So most of the industries like agriculture, processing and manufacturing, tourism, depends on biodiversity and the ecosystem services that it provides for their raw materials. So even the pandemic that we are experiencing right now has something to do with biodiversity. The spread of zoonotic disease or diseases that are transferred from one species to another, like animals to human, is related to how we manage biodiversity. So I think that's how can we better understand biodiversity.
Thank you. And Mr. Armil, would you be able to contextualize our discussion today on biodiversity in ASEAN? How significant is biodiversity? You already said it's quote unquote life, but how can we put it in the context of ASEAN? How important and significant is it?
Well, putting a significance on ASEAN biodiversity, I would want to discuss it in two aspects. Well, one is environment, the other is on economy. In terms of environment, the ASEAN region only occupies 3% of the Earth total land area, but the natural asset of ASEAN is among the highest in the world. For example, 4 out of the 30 biodiversity hotspots is in ASEAN. 3 out of the world's 17 mega diverse countries is in ASEAN. 20% of the total coral reef of the world is in ASEAN. And we have the third largest tropical forest. This is how significant biodiversity is as far as environment is concerned. Sad to say though, our region is also one of the most biologically threatened. In terms of the other aspect of economy, the economy of ASEAN is the 5th largest in the world, and it is one of the fastest growing economy. But our economy in ASEAN is very much dependent on our natural capital, which provides the necessary raw materials that we trade to the world. Like, for example, agricultural products coming from the manufacturing and processing sector. So for the region's economy to continue to grow and benefit everyone, we need to protect and sustainably manage our natural capital and biodiversity. So that's how significant biodiversity is in the region, as well as how important is the ASEAN biodiversity to the world.
Thank you, Mr. Armil. That's correct. I think when you discuss that there are two aspects of it, environment and also economic, and you discuss how much actually the natural resources and how we can maintain it in ASEAN is actually very important for economic growth. Now I'd like to shift over to the environment, and seeing now that obviously climate change is here. Recently there was reports coming out, and everyone is working towards mitigating it. So I want to ask this next question to Dr. Ellie about protecting and conserving the rich biodiversity in ASEAN. So in that sense, because we have the most major percentage of world's peatlands here in ASEAN, maybe you could tell us a bit more about how that affects and the peatland word itself.
Yeah, thank you, Nabila. Well, so yeah, in ASEAN, we have about 23.6 million hectares of peatlands, and it is about 56% of global tropical peatlands in the world. So conserving and protecting peatlands, I think this is one of the ways to actually mitigate the climate change, because well, we know that peatland ideally wet in wet condition, but once it rains and once it emits, then peatland itself will emit huge carbon emission. So Peatland has a very important role, for example, as a water regulation in a peatland ecosystem, and also as a biodiversity conservation, and also like floods and drought prevention. As the main function, I think, is as a carbon storage. As I mentioned before, that once the peatlands drain or damage, then the role as a peatland carbon storage will turn into the carbon emitter. And now we are running a project actually. So we are running a SUPA project. SUPA is sustainable use of peatlands and its mitigation in ASEAN, and it is launched by the European Union and also German government, actually to support the ASEAN and combating the transboundary haze pollution and peatland fires.
Okay. I think it's interesting how you said that it acts as a carbon storage. So yeah, I feel like not only that, it also regulates water and it prevents droughts and floods. So I think it's an important thing to note about peatland. We have a question from the audience regarding peatlands. I'm hoping you can answer this, Dr. Ellie. Nabila asked, what is the most important thing to know about a peatland?
The most important thing is ideally peatland is wet, so we need to avoid to drain the peatland, and as much as possible we need to conserve the peatland. And also when we found that the peatland already degraded, then we need to do the peatland restoration. I think that's very important to do.
So I think if I could sum it up, maybe targeting peatlands is very important when we're talking about it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, correct.
So we've talked a bit of peatlands here. There's a lot of people who talk, I think what Dr. Ellie said, we can refer peatlands as the silent hero in the climate change mitigation effort. And she explained a bit of that now before. So now I'd probably want to move to Gab and to hear a bit of your perspective on peatlands and wetlands. So you founded a community of youth engaging in wetlands. Can you please explain a bit about what you do in the organization and what it does?
Yeah, so we co-founded Youth Engage in Wetlands, or YEW, in 2018. So it's an international youth network that advocates and is dedicated for the conservation of wetlands. And we have different partnerships, for example, with the Intergovernmental Treaty of the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands. And one thing we noted is that, wetlands, a lot of people are not really aware. A lot of my colleagues, a lot of my classmates, or majority of the youth don't even know what wetlands are, but they know about forests, they know about oceans. And this is something that we wanted to bring to the table, to really make the youth aware about wetlands and what they can do to actually protect them. So we give opportunities, we create capacity building development projects for youth, connecting them with relevant stakeholders within different countries around the world. So one example is called the East Asian Australasian Flyway, which is an important part of biodiversity or migratory birds on wetlands. And for example, in the Philippines, it's actually also a hotspot, biodiversity hotspot. And now we're a group of 11 young people from all over the world, represented by each of these habitable continents. And we wanted to make it more inclusive in a way that every youth has a voice for these wetlands, because there are a lot of Ramsar sites or international list of importance of wetlands all around the world. And we really wanted to put it into the mainstream and make sure that people are aware about it through storytelling, through education, through research programs, through conferences. So that's really much about the work that we do in Youth Engaged in Wetlands.
And Gab, what was the motivation to start this? Was it because of the rarity of knowledge of youth around wetlands, or have you always been interested in it?
Yes, I actually had experience to see and the devastation happening to the wetlands when I was a kid. And I think that really sparked that passion and advocacy in pushing for wetland conservation and realizing, hey, maybe I can make a difference as a young person, as someone from the youth sector. And I didn't look back. I worked with different projects for example, in National Geographic, and creating stories, long-term solutions, partnering with different organizations to really provide and make sure it's a community-based conservation effort in the wetlands here in the Philippines. That wetland is actually called the Agusan Marshland, so it's one of the largest inland wetland in the Philippines.
So to any Filipinos who are watching, I hope you get some new insight on the wetlands here that Gab is talking about. Thank you, Gab. I have my next question for Aubrey. So still related to youth engagement, you are a youth biodiversity leader. Could you probably describe to us what a youth biodiversity leader does and share your story on how you became one?
So my conservation work started as a volunteer for Center for Sustainability. It's a women-led youth environmental nonprofit based here in Palawan, Philippines. And so I did a volunteer work for the organization during my undergrad to document the feasibility of starting an ecotourism livelihood for the indigenous Batak and Tagbanwa tribe within the Cleopatra's Needle critical habitat. And I also did the documentation of the management planning for the proposed critical habitat. So after I graduated, I officially worked for the same organization. And that's where I led some of the projects that eventually led to the declaration of Cleopatra's Needle as a critical habitat in 2017. So the main goal of the organization is to establish legal protection for the unprotected key biodiversity areas in the province by creating national parks or protected areas. So I became a youth biodiversity leader for that work. And so for me, becoming a youth biodiversity leader it's about walking the talk. So basically encouraging more youth to do conservation work. And there's not a lot of youth doing conservation work, especially here in my province. This is not a popular career for most youth here, young people here. So, and also I think the most important part of the work that I do is basically bringing awareness and passing on the mic to the frontline communities that are directly affected by the climate change and the environmental degradation that we are experiencing now in our province.
Thank you so much, Aubrey. I'm going to ask a question from the audience, and I think it relates to Gab or Aubrey. It is from Eco, and he's asking how to bring youth to have awareness of the importance to preserve our biodiversity for our sustainable life. So both of you do youth outreach. Perhaps you can try wrapping or giving any advice in just maybe 2-3 sentences, maybe starting from Gab.
Yeah, I think the most important is the education curriculum. I think, biodiversity, wetlands, peatlands aren't really being taught in schools. And that's where a lot of the foundation of these youth or students or, future leaders would be coming from. And I think that's really important to invest on science research from, different stakeholders to make sure that the youth are aware and educated on biodiversity, on wetlands and peatlands.
Okay, thanks, Gab. And Aubrey?
Yeah, to second Gab's answer and also to add to his answer, for me, this is the most important lesson that I learned from my mentor is that biodiversity starts at home. It's from engaging your family and talking to your friends about biodiversity to going to the local communities, bringing awareness to them. And there are a lot of references now, online published literatures about biodiversity. So we can start by educating ourselves. And there's a recent report from the IPCC about the evidence of the climate change that we are experiencing now. So we can start, reading and compiling those documents, and hopefully we can share the knowledge that we learned from those documents.
That's great. So I really like how you said biodiversity starts at home. And it's all about, again, if you're walking the talk, you would nourish yourself with the knowledge, and hopefully you can pass on that knowledge to the closest ones first, and then later on for further outreach. So that's great. We have another question from the audience, and this is for Mr. Emil. So, how do we as youth battle or make change if politics and big corporations play a major role in not achieving a sustainable environment?
Okay. As I mentioned earlier, and as Aubrey has mentioned, biodiversity should start with us. It starts at home. It starts with ourselves. I think for the youth, educating yourself, becoming more aware would enable you to take the proper action. Because the more knowledge that you have, the more you become more passionate in anything that you do. And this generation, technology is just at a click of at the click of a thumb. It's just it's always within our reach, unlike before. So I think empowering ourselves with information, the right information, is one of the key steps for us to better engage in terms of better engage with politicians, with the big businesses. So it starts with knowledge, I think, and small steps. If you consolidate them, becomes really powerful.
Do you have any tips on how to consolidate them?
Well, I think that's why we're in ACB. We have this ASEAN Youth Biodiversity Program, so that we can have more youth being more aware, and also mentoring them how to better engage in terms of with government and also with the private sector. That's one of the trainings, the 1 year mentoring that the YBLs go through. So part of their training is how to better engage with government and also with the other sectors.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Emil. If anyone has any questions about the YBL program and the mentorship, you can drop them also in the comments. I'm going to ask a similar question to Dr. Ellie. It is, again, still on youth engagement, but as a youth, in your opinion, what can we do to contribute to the mitigation of climate change? So, because there's so many reports coming up, there's so many information, there's a lot of people who are doing action, but what if we're just starting out and we sort of want to get in there? I know a lot of education popped up here, but maybe you have any other opinions or other ways to make small steps.
Okay, thanks, Nabila. So, well, in AYBP project, we structure into components. Component 1 is implemented by GIZ, focuses on state actors, and component 2 implemented by WR Indonesia, collaboration with TRC in Malaysia and IDH Indonesia, focuses on non-state actors. So I think related to youths, then youths can support the effort for restoring peatlands, conserving peatland, and also sustainable peatland management through social media engagement, for example, and others is maybe doing the campus visits, and also the website development or maybe podcast development. And moreover, if they have opportunity, it will be good also if they are interested in conducting research on peatlands topics in ASEAN, so that from this research result, it can provide data and information to support sustainable peatland management implementation in ASEAN.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Ellie. And to Aubrey and Gab too, maybe Aubrey first. Do you have any unconventional ways or other sort of starter packs if you want to get started in learning about the issue on sustainability and climate change?
Yeah, I think I would just reiterate again to, educating yourself, and then learning the stories from the local communities, especially the indigenous people who are directly affected by the environmental degradation, because, they live in the area since time immemorial. So they know how it changes during, from the past until now. So it's also really important to learn the lessons from the local community, especially the indigenous people. So aside from the book reference that we have, we can also learn from the actual people that live in the forest or in the
I think that's a great answer, and we are living amongst the largest biodiversity in the world. So there's a lot of indigenous communities and a lot of regions that perhaps their stories haven't been told yet. So I think that's a great way to approach it and look at climate change from a different perspective. Thanks, Aubrey. Gab, do you have any quick notes to add?
Yeah, I think, as youth, you have a voice, and this voice should not, transcend from social media and really come into action by volunteering, even through voting for leaders that respect the environment and is inclusive with indigenous communities and minorities. I think that's a really important, take to really support this growing movement for the environment and, to mitigate the impacts and effects of climate change, because, we still need to demand transparency and accountability from our leaders and business corporations. And this could be done through, voting and education, and as well as really engaging yourself and really putting yourself out there to bring forth and move with the movement.
Okay, thanks so much, Gab. That's really great, and I really hope that everyone here picked up a couple of things today. Unfortunately, I have to wrap up soon, but I know that I certainly got a couple of things to add to my climate action list. So I would like to thank the panelists today. To all of the audiences, if you have any more questions regarding perhaps the SUPA ASEAN, ACB, or anything directed to Gab or Aubrey, you may ask in the comment box, and they will be sticking around for an extra 15 minutes to answer your questions. So you can go ahead and ask them. And if you want to know more about peatlands, you can head over to the SUPA booth in the expo session, or you can also learn more about EU's initiatives in biodiversity in the BCAMP booth. You can rewatch the videos we played here earlier, read the brochures, and have a live Q&A. We also invite you to take pictures of your sustainable fashion pieces. All you have to do is take a picture, post them on social media, and tag EU in ASEAN on our channels. If you share your people who share their thoughts today, and we decide it's the best, you might end up with a special hamper from EU. So that's it. It's the last talk of the day. I hope to see you all again tomorrow with some more exciting talks to sit through. Goodbye.